Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to give you some first impressions of the Starfarer now that it's actually flight ready. Now before we get into this, it is worth pointing out that CIG's done a really good job of making, quick adjustments to ships after they do their initial release. So things are going to change quite a bit, and I'm going to have to do some follow-up videos on it pretty soon. But I wanted to talk about where it's at in the game today. Also, most of the footage that you're going to be watching is going to be showing just flying around or PvE combat as opposed to mostly against other players. And that's because the PvP portion has been a little bit harder to find considering that the Starfarer isn't an arena commander and the PTU is actually pretty limited at the moment. But I have gotten enough to at least get a good feel for where it stands today so I can talk about it. Now we do have two different versions of the Starfarer to talk about, but the good news for the purpose of this video is that the stats are currently very, very similar. Now I'd expect to see quite a bit of changes between the Gemini and the base model, but today the only real differences appear to be with speed, armor, and aesthetics. Now when we start talking about speed, the Starfarers are hardly fast, but they are actually not terribly slow either. The base model in SCM mode is 140, where the Gemini is 150. And when you add Afterburner Boost, the speeds increase to 200 and 220 meters per second, with the Gemini being faster. And then at cruise, we see speeds of 450 and 460, again with the Gemini being the faster variant. Now neither is considered fast, but when you consider the size and mass to the speed and kind of compare something like that to something like a Cutlass, it actually is moving pretty good for a ship of this size. The maneuverability of the line is a little bit better than I expected it would be, which is actually a pretty good thing since it's not really, it's not really great either. It just feels well balanced. Overall, it's kind of drifty and it is a bit hard to get the ship to change directions, as it should be, because it actually feels like a big ship. The acceleration is also something that you shouldn't really expect to be blown away by, but again, it's not as bad as you might expect. Now, all of these statements come with one very big caveat, and that is the fact that this is a cargo and fuel vessel, and it's not carrying either of those right now. So I expect to see significant decreases in agility once the ships are actually loaded with some form of cargo. I also expect to see what was described upon release, and that would be that the base Starfarer should have better maneuverability than the Gemini, based on the Gemini having extra armor and mass. Now, once that happens, it matches the description of the Gemini, and the Gemini ends up being faster, but the Starfarer base ends up being more maneuverable. That's a good balance once you consider the extra armor and larger weapons and shields that the Gemini has. The Gemini can end up affording to sit in one spot a little bit longer to deal more damage or take more damage, as compared to its base model variant. Now, speaking of damage, the Gemini does appear to have stats in place for better durability, though we don't see increased bulkheads on the design of the ship right now like we kind of expected to. The Gemini takes 25% less damage from physical weapons while taking the same amount of damage as the base model from energy weapons. And one odd note is that the Gemini takes 20% more damage from distortion weapons than the base Starfarer does. Now again, I think once we actually see shield changes and balance, the energy weapons are going to be less effective against the Gemini, as it can bring a bigger and better shield to the fight anyways, meaning that hitting the hull is less likely. Now the weapons on the Starfarer are actually pretty scary. One volley is going to destroy most single-seat fighters out there, which is a lot of fun to use. It's basically bringing 4 of the really large weapons that you can throw on the Super Hornet ball turret or the Cutlass turret, not to mention 3 other turrets on the ship. So I'm not sure if we're going to see the weapons increased on the Gemini or, those end up being decreased on the base model. But one of those two things are going to happen if Ben's comments are going to be taken as gospel, because he said that the Starfarer Gemini was going to have a size up in weapons in basically every single category. Now, at first glance, they may feel a little bit overpowered, but it's important to remember that this is a large ship with poor maneuverability, and there needs to be a very real deterrent to fighters picking on you. Fighters, can find success by staying mobile and changing directions, often kind of considering that the Starfarer is so drifty and massive that it's going to have a hard time making the necessary adjustments. Personally, if I was planning an attack against a Starfarer, I would take my chances on the underbelly of the ship where the smaller turrets lie, and try and stay closer to the front of the ship, making you a harder target while staying mobile. That large top turret and the nose guns, or the flank guns, basically means that there's a lot of teeth up front and on top, and I would probably try and avoid that section. Either way, a combined effort from a group of fighters is definitely going to be the best option for attacking this beast. Now, the turrets on the Starfarer appear to be well placed and provide really good coverage against attacks. One thing the Gemini brings to the fight that the base model doesn't is the missile pod on the nose instead of the fuel intake. And it appears to be loaded with size 3 missiles that do a ton of damage and actually track and kill targets. Now, I'm not sure if that missiles in general were fixed in 2.4 or if they're just working on this ship, but it's nice to see them working again, even if it's limited just to the Gemini. All in all, my biggest beef with the Starfarer right now is the terrible glare on the cockpit. I'm sure it's something that's going to end up being fixed soon, but when you combine that with what's already considered to be really terrible visibility in the cockpit, it can be really hard to see. Now, I'm okay with the size of the cockpit glass, and I actually think it's a pretty good, design element, but it's a hard task when you combine the two things at the moment, the glare and the size. All in all, the Starfarer is actually in a really good place in my mind. I think we need to see things implemented in a way that I'm hoping is mostly a placeholder. I think the Gemini is kind of a placeholder in its current design. It needs the Aegis styling that we were promised. It needs the larger weapons than the base model, and we probably need to see the bulkheads increased and that interior cargo area shrunk. Or maybe we're seeing armored fuel tanks that make sense for the lower cargo capacity. So I'm excited to see another large ship in the game, and I really hope that we get the option for scooping fuel soon and refueling other ships. Not only because it adds more to the game for us to do, but it really will kind of showcase the real purpose of what these ships can do. So I'm going to make sure that I'm doing follow-up videos as things change, because there's going to be a lot of changes. And I'll probably even do one once I get a chance to do a little bit more PvP. But in the meantime, I wanted you guys to have something regarding the ship right now. So if you have any questions about any of this, please ask. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you guys later. Take care.